I never believed in random encounters that could change a life. To me, those stories belonged to books, movies, or people who enjoyed exaggerating. Life felt more predictable, more structured, until that evening when the rain decided to play tricks on me. It was one of those days that dragged on, when work felt endless and the clock refused to move. By the time I stepped out of the office, the city had already dimmed into a slow twilight. Thin, persistent raindrops stitched the air, scattering people under umbrellas like nervous birds hiding under their wings. I had, of course, left mine at home, so I walked at my usual, unhurried pace, letting the drizzle soak into my shoulders. It didn't bother me. I had always liked rain in a strange, almost stubborn way. It quieted the streets, dulled the noise of traffic, and wrapped everything in a reflective sheen. At the bus stop, I noticed her. She stood slightly apart from the others, a newspaper clutched awkwardly above her head, as if it were some fragile shield against the water. It was almost comical, but not in a cruel way, more like watching someone improvise in desperation, refusing to surrender. The paper sagged, already dark with damp patches, but she held on stubbornly, her hair clinging to her face in fine strands. Something about the scene made me stop. I wasn't the type to approach strangers, much less in the middle of a wet, gray evening. Yet before I had a chance to talk myself out of it, I found my feet moving toward her. "Want to share my jacket?" I asked, half joking, tugging lightly at the hood. Her head lifted, and she laughed, a soft, unguarded laugh that seemed to cut through the steady drizzle. "Why not?" she said, shifting closer. And just like that, without names, without introductions, we started walking side by side under the same hood. The rain pressed us shoulder to shoulder, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't mind the weather at all. Her presence beside me felt oddly natural, as if this had happened before, as if we were simply continuing a walk we had started years ago and forgotten to finish. The rain tapped against my hood, slid down the back of my neck, but I hardly noticed. Her hair kept sticking to her cheeks, and each time she brushed it back, she smiled. Not the polite smile of strangers, but something warmer, almost secret, as though she was amused that the world had forced us into this strange little arrangement. For a while, we didn't say much. The rhythm of our steps matched. Our shoulders brushed with every uneven patch of pavement, and the silence was comfortable. Then, just as we passed under a flickering street lamp, she turned her head slightly. "I don't really like buses," she said. Her voice was soft, but firm, like a confession she'd been holding back. "Do you mind if we walk instead?" I blinked at her, surprised. Most people I knew rushed to get out of the rain, to shorten the journey as much as possible. But here she was suggesting the opposite, to stretch the moment, to take the long way. "Sure," I answered. "I like walking." And so we left the bus stop behind and drifted into the city streets, now washed clean by the weather. Neon signs shimmered on wet asphalt, streetlights fractured into 1,000 trembling reflections in the puddles, and cars hissed past like restless shadows. We talked, cautiously at first, about things that didn't matter. Music, the bookshop around the corner, a cafe she claimed had the best cinnamon rolls in town. Then the words deepened, slipping into stories of childhood, favorite places, dreams we admitted only in whispers. It was strange how easy it was to tell her things I rarely told anyone. Maybe it was the rain, or the way the city blurred around us. Or maybe it was simply her, the way she listened as if each word mattered. By the time we reached the corner where she said she lived, I realized I didn't want to stop. She slowed her pace, hesitated in front of a tall, dimly lit building. For a moment, she looked at me as though weighing something in her mind. Then she gave the faintest, almost mischievous smile. "You're soaked," she said. "Do you want to come in for tea?" And though I could have refused, though I could have made some polite excuse, I didn't. The moment I stepped inside her apartment, the air shifted. It was warmer, quieter, and filled with the faint smell of cinnamon and something sweet I couldn't name. The contrast to the rain outside was almost shocking, like crossing from one world into another. Her place was small, but not cramped. The kind of home where everything felt chosen, not random. A stack of books leaned against the wall instead of a shelf, A half-finished jigsaw puzzle lay scattered across a low coffee table, and an old armchair with a knitted blanket draped over the back seemed to invite anyone to sit. She kicked off her shoes and gestured toward the tiny kitchen. "Sit. I'll make tea," she said, in a tone so casual it felt as though I had been there 100 times before. I obeyed, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. The kettle was old, dented in places, but it hummed softly as it began to heat. She moved around with ease, opening cupboards, pulling down mismatched mugs. Her presence filled the room effortlessly, light, unhurried, like the rain that had brought us together. "You really didn't mind walking in that weather?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. "Not at all," I said. "I think rain makes the city softer, quieter." She tilted her head, considering this, and smiled. "Most people only complain about wet shoes." The kettle whistled, sharp and sudden, breaking the moment. She poured the water, added a spoonful of honey into one of the cups, and slid it toward me. The steam curled up between us, carrying that familiar, comforting scent of black tea. For a while, we sat across from each other, sipping in silence. But it wasn't awkward. Her eyes lingered on me in a way that felt both curious and careful, like she was trying to read the lines between my words. Then the conversation returned as easily as if we had known each other for years. We spoke about books, the ones we loved, the ones we had abandoned halfway. She told me about a song that always made her cry, and I admitted a dream I'd never shared with anyone: to travel without a plan, to let chance decide the road. Time slid past unnoticed, until the rain outside softened into a distant murmur and the clock on the wall edged quietly past midnight. That was when she rose, reaching for a blanket on the sofa. As she walked past, her hand brushed mine. It was the lightest touch, unplanned, unintentional, yet it sent a jolt through me, sharp and undeniable. For a heartbeat, the air stilled. We both looked up at the same time, our eyes locking. Words seemed suddenly useless. The world outside could have vanished, and I would not have noticed. Her hand lingered for the smallest fraction of a second, but it was enough. My skin still remembered the warmth long after she had pulled away. She pretended to fuss with the blanket, unfolding it carefully as though the moment hadn't just tilted the air around us. I should have said something. A joke, perhaps. A casual remark to ease the tension. But instead, I sat frozen, caught in the strange electricity that hummed between us. She draped the blanket over the armchair and finally looked back at me. Her gaze held steady, almost too steady, as if she was daring me to say what we both already knew. Instead, she smiled, a quiet, enigmatic curve of her lips that revealed nothing and everything at once. Then she sat back down, tucking her legs beneath her, hands folded loosely around her cup of tea. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy, but it wasn't light either. It hovered in the space between us, charged with all the words we didn't dare speak. I took another sip of tea, though it had cooled. My mind scrambled for something safe to say, but my heart was faster. Every detail of her, the way her damp hair framed her face, the faint freckles near her temple, the way her fingers tapped absently against the mug, felt suddenly magnified. Finally, she broke the silence. "Funny, isn't it?" she said softly. "What is?" I asked. How strangers can feel like anything but strangers. Her words landed with a weight I couldn't ignore. I exhaled slowly, setting my cup down. "Yeah," I said, "like we've met before, and just forgot." She tilted her head, studying me as though trying to decide if I was serious. Then slowly she nodded. Exactly. The rain outside had stopped entirely now, leaving behind only the faint ticking of drops against the window frame. The city beyond was hushed, as though it, too, was waiting for what came next. And I knew, with a certainty that startled me, that whatever this was, this fragile, improbable connection born from a shared hood in the rain, it wasn't something I wanted to end. The clock on her wall ticked past 1 in the morning, though neither of us seemed to notice at first. The world outside her window felt impossibly far away, as if we had stepped into a pocket of time that belonged only to us. At some point, she stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peer out. The street below glistened with leftover rain, empty now, the reflections of street lamps shivering in shallow puddles. "It's strange," she murmured, her back still to me. "Nights like this make the city feel smaller, like it's just you and me, and nothing else exists." Her words clung to me, heavy and intoxicating. I want to believe them. When she turned back, her eyes lingered on me a fraction too long, and that look alone carried more than any sentence could. My chest tightened with the ache of not knowing how far I was allowed to go, of not wanting to ruin what had been so effortlessly perfect until now. She broke the tension with a sudden laugh, quiet, almost embarrassed. "Listen to me," she said, shaking her head. "I don't usually invite strangers in at midnight, and I definitely don't usually talk like this." I smiled. "I don't usually follow strangers home in the rain. Guess we're both breaking rules tonight." That seemed to ease her. She pulled the blanket over her shoulders, sat down again, and curled up on the armchair across from me. For a moment, she looked almost fragile, wrapped in the soft wool, her knees drawn close, steam from her forgotten cup still rising faintly between us. Time slipped further. I didn't check my phone, didn't think about work tomorrow, didn't care. I just listened to the way her voice curved around stories of her childhood, the way her hands animated every memory, how her laughter filled the tiny kitchen as though it were made only for her. And then, somewhere between a joke about her first failed attempt at baking bread and a pause where her eyes drifted toward mine again, the night simply stopped. It wasn't the kind of ending marked by words or decisions. It was softer than that, like an unfinished sentence. Something had been left open, deliberately, as if fate itself wanted to make sure we would see each other again. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. We hesitated there, two silhouettes caught in the narrow hallway, the air between us tight, with everything unspoken. "Good night," she whispered. "Good night," I echoed, though it felt far too small for what the night had been. As I stepped back into the cool, damp air, the world seemed strangely brighter. The city lights shimmered in the leftover rain, and I found myself smiling at nothing at all. I knew I would be back. The walk home felt unreal, as though I was drifting through a city I no longer recognized. The same wet streets, the same flickering lamps, and yet everything was painted with a strange glow, touched by the memory of her laughter, her voice, the brush of her hand against mine. By the time I reached my apartment, the rain had stopped completely. Drops clung to the edges of rooftops and wires, glittering faintly under the pale streetlights. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and was met with silence. The kind of silence that felt bigger after warmth, after voices. I collapsed onto the couch, still damp, still carrying the scent of her apartment on my clothes, cinnamon, tea, something indefinable that belonged only to her. Closing my eyes, I replayed it all. The walk, the tea, the half-smiles that said more than words ever could. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe it was nothing, a passing kindness between two strangers on a rainy night. And yet, deep down, I knew it wasn't nothing. You don't carry nothing home with you like this. You don't lie awake replaying nothing in your head until the early hours. I slept little that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, the curve of her smile, the way her eyes had softened when she said strangers could feel like anything but strangers. Morning came gray and unremarkable, the city still damp from yesterday's rain. I moved through my routine in a daze, barely tasting my coffee, barely noticing the world around me. But when I passed the bus stop that evening, I slowed. I told myself it was coincidence, that my path simply happened to cross there again. But in truth, I was searching, and then I saw her. She was standing exactly where she had been the night before. No newspaper this time, no desperate shield against the weather. Just her with her hair loose around her shoulders, her gaze drifting as though she was waiting for something or someone. My pulse quickened. I almost turned back, afraid it had all been a one-time miracle, afraid that maybe she wouldn't remember me the way I remembered her. But then her eyes lifted. She saw me, and she smiled, slow and certain, like she had been expecting me all along. Her smile undid all my hesitation. Whatever doubts I'd carried with me dissolved in that instant, like mist in sunlight. She stepped closer, as though the distance between us was something temporary, something waiting to be erased. "I wondered if you'd show up," she said. I laughed nervously. Honestly, I wasn't sure I would. Yet here you are. Her voice had that same lightness as before, but beneath it I heard something steadier, as though she, too, had replayed last night 100 times. We fell in a step again, naturally without planning. This time, no rain forced us under the same hood. The streets were clear, washed clean, the air damp but gentle. Yet our shoulders brushed just the same, as though the memory of rain still clung to us. We talked more easily now. She told me about the cafe she visited every Sunday, the one with old armchairs that sagged as though they remembered every person who'd ever sat in them. I told her about my habit of collecting books I never finished, my shelves lined with half-lived stories. She teased me for it, and I let her. At some point, she paused, turning to me with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "You know, I still owe you something." I raised a brow. "Oh, what's that?" "A proper walk," she said. "Not one forced by weather. One we choose." Her words carried a weight that went beyond casual suggestion. A chosen walk, a chosen moment. Not fate's trick, not chance's push, but ours. "Then let's choose it now," I said before I could stop myself. Her smile deepened. She nodded toward the quieter streets, away from the bus stop, away from the familiar. And just like that, we wandered again, this time not as strangers caught in the rain, but as two people who had decided, silently and together, that whatever this was, it wasn't over. The city opened itself to us, glowing windows, the soft hum of evening, the distant bark of a dog. Time stretched and folded in on itself, just as it had the night before, until I forgot the day, the week, the world beyond her presence. When we finally reached her building again, I realized I wasn't just hoping she'd invite me in. I was certain she would. And when she turned at the door and said, "Tea," the word was less a question and more a promise. Her apartment felt different this time, not because it had changed, the same books stacked against the wall, the same puzzle waiting half-finished on the table, the same faint scent of cinnamon clinging to the air, but because I no longer entered as a stranger. She seemed more at ease, too. She moved around the kitchen without the small hesitations of yesterday, as though she already knew I would be sitting at the table, waiting. She poured tea into the same mismatched mugs, slid one toward me with a smile that was quieter now, but no less certain. Conversation came quickly. It was lighter at first, stories from work, little observations about the city. But then, as the night deepened, so did the words. She spoke of fears she'd never admitted out loud, of dreams that felt too fragile to share. And I listened, not out of politeness, but because every syllable seemed to matter. At one point, she leaned back in her chair, studying me in silence. Her gaze was steady, unblinking, as though she was measuring something she hadn't yet named. "You feel familiar," she said at last. I let the words settle between us. "You too," I admitted, "like we met somewhere before. Or maybe we're supposed to." Her lips curved, not into a smile, but something softer, something almost shy. Maybe that's what this is. A meeting that was always waiting. The rain didn't come that night, but its absence didn't matter. The same closeness was there, as if the weather had only been an excuse. The real storm was already inside the room. Sometime after midnight, she rose to fetch the blanket again. And just like before, as she passed, her hand brushed mine. This time, though, neither of us pretended it was an accident. She stopped, standing beside me, her fingers still grazing mine. I looked up at her, and for a moment, the whole world seemed to lean forward, waiting. And in that pause, in that breathless fraction of time, I knew with a clarity that frightened me. This was not chance anymore. This was choice. Her fingers lingered against mine, light but certain. The room seemed to narrow until there was nothing left but the space between us, trembling with all the words we had not said. I could have spoken, I could have broken the tension with something safe, something ordinary. But her eyes held me still, and in them I saw no demand, no question, only the quiet acknowledgement that we both understood. Slowly, deliberately, I turned my hand so that our palms met. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her fingers slip into mine, her grip gentle but unshakable. It was such a simple gesture, and yet it felt monumental. More than the rain, more than the tea, more than the long walks through wet streets. This was the moment that defined everything. She sat down beside me, closer now, the blanket draped over both our shoulders. Neither of us spoke. Words had carried us here, but now silence did more than language ever could. Her head tilted, resting lightly against me. I felt the weight of it, the warmth of her hair, still carrying the faint scent of the outside air. My pulse slowed, deepened, as though my body was trying to match hers. At some point, she whispered, barely audible, "Do you believe in fate?" I thought of the rain, of the newspaper collapsing in her hands, of the bus she didn't take, of the path that had led me to that exact corner at that exact moment. I thought of how easily we could have missed each other, how a single choice might have erased all of this. I didn't, I said honestly. Not until now. She breathed out softly, a sound closer to relief than to laughter. Her hand tightened around mine just slightly. The clock ticked somewhere in the distance, but it no longer mattered. Midnight could stretch forever if it meant holding this fragile, impossible moment. And in the quiet glow of her kitchen, I understood. Sometimes life doesn't wait for permission. Sometimes it simply chooses for you. The days that followed blurred together, stitched with the same quiet magic. We met again and again, not always by chance anymore, but by choice. Walks became routine, tea turned into ritual, and the once awkward silence grew into something steady, something we could lean on. And yet, every time we passed that bus stop, I felt a strange tug in my chest. The memory of that night, her holding a soggy newspaper against the rain, and me fumbling with a half-joke about sharing my jacket, lingered as vividly as if it had happened yesterday. One evening, weeks later, the sky broke open with rain once more. The city scattered under umbrellas, hurried footsteps echoing against the wet pavement. She and I stood again at the same corner, watching droplets cascade through the orange glow of the street lamps. She glanced at me with that same mischievous smile I had first seen. "Déjà vu," she said. "Not quite," I answered. This time, I brought my umbrella. She laughed, but instead of opening it, she stepped under my arm the same way she had that first night, pressing close, shoulder to shoulder. The umbrella dangled uselessly at my side, forgotten. We walked through the storm like that. Not because we had to, but because we wanted to. The rain no longer mattered. What mattered was that it had brought me here to her. Later, when I lay awake with her hand resting lightly against mine, I thought of how easily I could have missed it all. If I'd rushed home, if she'd caught the bus, if either of us had decided differently. But we hadn't. We had met in the rain, and everything had changed. And now, whenever I pass that bus stop, I still look back, not out of longing, but out of gratitude. Because sometimes fate doesn't shout. Sometimes it whispers softly through the sound of falling rain. And if you're lucky enough to listen, it gives you exactly the person you were waiting for.